Some calls change your night, others change your life. That night, mine did both. It was close to midnight when the phone rang, sharp and urgent, slicing through the quiet like it had something to say before I even answered. I'd been half asleep on the couch, a late-night talk show murmuring in the background when I saw her name glowing on the screen. Emily. I smiled for a second until I heard her voice. Mom, please help me. It didn't sound like my daughter, it sounded like a scared little girl trapped in a grown woman's world. Emily, what happened? Where are you? Her breath came through in broken gasps. I'm at the police station. He hit me and then he filed a report against me. For a heartbeat, everything inside me froze. Then came the fire, that fierce mother bear kind of anger that makes you move before you can think. Stay where you are, I said, already grabbing my keys. Don't say a word to anyone. I'm coming, sweetheart, I'm coming. The drive there felt endless. Every red light mocked me, every turn felt slower than the last. My fingers clutched the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. By the time I pulled up to the police station, it was past midnight. Cold wind slapped me as I stepped out, carrying that sterile smell of rain and asphalt. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed like angry bees. And then I saw her sitting alone on a metal bench in the hallway. My Emily. Her face was swollen, one eye bruised purple, her bottom lip split. The sight of her like that made my stomach twist. Emily, I whispered, rushing toward her. When she saw me, she broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she buried her face into my shoulder. He said I attacked him, she sobbed. He told them I was violent, that I scratched him. I pulled her close, trying to steady her shaking body. He did this to you, I said quietly, anger rising like bile. And then I saw him, Daniel, my son-in-law, standing across the hall with a smug look, a bandage on his cheek like some kind of victim. I'd always known there was something dark behind that charming smile. Tonight, I could finally see it. Before I could speak, a police officer walked up. Mrs. Carter, please calm down. This is a domestic dispute. We're taking statements from both sides. Domestic dispute? I snapped. My daughter's the one covered in bruises and you're calling it a dispute? He sighed, patient but cold. Ma'am, both parties filed reports. We have to hear both sides. I felt Emily grab my sleeve, whispering through tears, don't let them take me, Mom. Please? Her voice cracked like glass, and in that moment something inside me hardened. No one's taking you anywhere, I said, my hand wrapping around hers. Not tonight. We sat there for hours, just waiting. Every sound was a reminder of how powerless I felt. The clack of boots down the hallway, the printer spitting out forms, the low hum of voices behind closed doors. Mom, she said quietly, I didn't fight him this time. I swear I didn't, I just tried to walk away. He grabbed my arm and shoved me into the wall. I scratched his face to get free, that's all. And then he called the cops before I could even breathe. Her voice broke again and I felt tears burning behind my own eyes. I'd seen the signs for years, the canceled plans, the makeup covering bruises, the way her smile stopped reaching her eyes. I'd begged her, Emily, please, if he ever hurts you again, come home. She always said, he's changing, Mom. He's trying. Now here we were. Daniel walked over like he owned the place, his voice smooth and venomous. She's exaggerating again, Mrs. Carter. You know how emotional she gets when she's been drinking. I stood up so fast my chair nearly tipped over. You say one more damn word, Daniel, and I'll... Ma'am, the officer stepped in, his tone sharp. I glared at Daniel. You think you can twist this like you twist her? Not anymore. He smirked like it was all beneath him. We'll see what the report says. Oh, how badly I wanted to wipe that look off his face. By the time an officer finally came out with paperwork, it was almost 2 a.m. For now, he said, both parties can go home separately. The investigation will continue tomorrow. Emily looked at me, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Can we go home now? She whispered. Yeah, baby, I said softly. Let's get you home. As we walked past Daniel, he muttered just loud enough for me to hear, you'll regret this. I stopped in my tracks, turned to him and said, calm and clear, no, Daniel. You will. The drive home was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the sound of rain hitting the windshield. Emily stared out the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Mom, she whispered after a while, do you think they believe me? My throat tightened. They will, sweetheart, and even if they don't, I do. Tears slipped down her face. I should have listened to you. I thought love meant forgiving everything. I reached over and took her hand. No, honey, love doesn't mean letting someone break you and calling it devotion. She looked at me, eyes raw. Am I stupid for still loving him? I smiled sadly. No, baby, you're just human, but now you've got to love yourself more. She nodded, wiping her eyes. The rest of the drive was silent, just two women holding onto what was left of peace. When we got home, I tucked her into bed like I used to when she was little. She looked fragile, bruised, but alive. I brushed her hair back and whispered, "You're safe now, sweetheart." Her voice came out sleepy and weak. "It's over now, right, Mom?" I paused, staring at the bruises on her face, the rise and fall of her chest. "I hope so," I said quietly. "Close your eyes, I've got you." She drifted off and I sat there in the dark, listening to her breathing. That's when I made a promise, the kind that comes from deep inside a mother's bones. No one was ever going to hurt my daughter again, not while I was still breathing. As I turned off the lamp and walked out, I whispered into the stillness. "This isn't over, Daniel, you just started a war you won't win. Some nights steal your peace, others awaken your fire, and tonight my fire was born." They say a bruise fades with time, but they never tell you what to do when the bruises are on her heart, not her skin. Morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen, soft and golden, the kind of light that used to mean peace. But not today. Today it just made the silence heavier. Emily sat at the table, still in the same clothes from last night. Her hair was messy, her hands cupped around a mug of coffee she hadn't touched. The steam had long vanished, like warmth had no place left in her world. "I can't go back there," she whispered, her voice barely holding together. "He'll do it again, Mom. I know he will." Her words trembled in the air, fragile but filled with truth. I sat across from her, my heart twisting at the sight. The faint purple bruises peeking from under her sleeve, the small cut near her lip, the way her eyes looked hollow, tired, like she'd been pretending to be okay for years. "You're not going back," I said quietly but firm. "Not this time, Emily, you hear me? Not again." She shook her head, a broken smile tugging at her lips. "You don't understand, Mom, he's too good at this. He knows how to twist everything. Everyone thinks he's perfect. The charming husband, the neighbor who helps shovel driveways, the guy who volunteers at fundraisers. He'll make them believe it's my fault. He always does." I reached across the table and held her trembling hand. "Then we'll make them see the truth," I said. She gave this small, bitter laugh, the kind that sounds more like defeat than humor. "The truth," she said, shaking her head. "He records our fights, Mom. He deletes my messages. He moves things around in the house and tells me I'm the one who did it. He makes me question my own memory." Her voice cracked at the end, and I could see the strength she'd been holding onto, that quiet, desperate strength, finally start to break. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I just looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised to be strong, smart, kind, now sitting there like a shadow of herself. I wanted to take every hurt she'd ever felt and carry it myself, but life doesn't work that way. That afternoon, she pulled out her phone. "Look," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I kept them. The photos, the texts, everything. I didn't want to believe I'd ever need them, but..." Her thumb trembled as she swiped through pictures of bruises on her arm, faint fingerprints on her neck, a cut along her shoulder. Then the texts, "I'm sorry, baby, you just make me so mad sometimes. I'll change, I promise. Don't tell anyone, please, we can fix this." And each time he said sorry, another wound followed like clockwork. I felt something inside me snap. It wasn't just anger, it was fury laced with heartbreak. "Emily," I said softly but firmly, "you have to report this, officially, again." She looked down at her lap, her voice small. "I already did once, Mom, you remember? They made me withdraw it. He cried in front of them, said he loved me, said I overreacted." She laughed bitterly. "They believed him, they always believe him." Her words hit me like a slap. That helplessness, the kind that comes when the system built to protect you just doesn't. I felt a deep, steady anger rise inside me. Not the loud kind that burns out fast, no, this was quiet and cold like steel. I took her phone from the table. "Then we'll document everything," I said, scrolling through the messages, saving screenshots, writing dates and times. "If the law can't see the truth, we'll make them see it. I'm not letting him destroy you, Emily." She looked up at me, her eyes filling again. "Mom, you can't fix this." I leaned forward. "Watch me." That night, the house was still. Emily fell asleep on the couch, curled under a blanket like she was trying to disappear. I sat by the window, staring out at the dark street. Outside, everything looked normal. porch lights flickering on down the block. A dog barking somewhere in the distance, the hum of passing cars. But normal was an illusion, one I'd stopped believing in the moment I saw my daughter's face at that police station. Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably asleep, maybe even smiling. He thought he'd won again, that she'd crawl back like always, that he could keep controlling her, breaking her, twisting her truth. But what he didn't know was that this time he wasn't just fighting her, he was fighting me. I got up quietly and walked to the living room. The TV screen reflected the faint glow of a news anchor's face, but the volume was low. Emily stirred a little in her sleep, whispering something I couldn't make out. I brushed her hair off her face. "You're safe, sweetheart," I whispered. "He's not gonna touch you again." She sighed softly and turned over, still half lost in whatever nightmare she was fighting. I went back to the window and watched the rain start to fall, slow at first, then harder, tapping against the glass like it was trying to speak. There was a part of me that wanted to call him, to scream at him, to tell him I knew. But that would give him the satisfaction of thinking he still had power over us. No, I wasn't going to play his game. Instead, I grabbed a notepad and started writing dates, times, everything Emily had told me. Each word felt like armor, each detail a weapon. For every bruise he left, I'd leave a paper trail. For every lie he told, I'd make sure there was truth waiting to crush it. Because when a mother's pushed far enough, she doesn't just fight back, she builds a war plan. And that's exactly what I did. Hours passed before I realized it was nearly dawn. The sky outside was fading from black to gray, and the world was waking up again. Emily was still asleep, clutching a pillow tight like it was the only thing keeping her together. I watched her, my baby, my whole heart, and I made another silent promise. He might have broken her once, but he'd never get another chance. Not while I was breathing. Not while I still had fight left in me. They say monsters hide under beds, but the real monsters wear wedding rings and smile for the neighbors, and I was done letting one live rent-free in my daughter's life. You don't need a battlefield to fight a war. Sometimes it happens right inside your living room, in whispers, in phone calls, in fear that never sleeps. 2 days had crawled by since the night at the station. Emily was quieter now, too quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't peace. It's just exhaustion wearing a mask. I was folding laundry when the phone rang. The number wasn't saved, but my gut told me who it was before I even picked up. "Mrs. Carter," came his voice, calm, polite, smooth as oil. "Can we talk? I think there's been a misunderstanding." I froze. Even his tone made my stomach twist. "A misunderstanding?" I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. "You hit my daughter?" He gave this soft, practiced sigh, the kind meant to sound hurt. "Emily gets emotional sometimes," he said gently. "You know how she is. I never meant for things to get this far. Maybe we can settle this quietly, no need to ruin reputations." Reputations? That word landed like poison. That was all he'd ever cared about, how things looked, not what they were. My pulse pounded in my ears. "You should have thought about your reputation before you laid a hand on her," I said coldly, and hung up before he could speak again. The silence afterward was deafening. That evening, Emily's friend Julia came over. She was a lawyer, sharp, composed, the kind of woman who carried calm like armor. She walked in with a folder under her arm and determination in her eyes. "All right," she said, spreading the papers on the kitchen table. "Let's go through everything, photos, texts, voice notes, anything that can build a pattern of abuse." Emily hesitated but nodded. Her hands trembled as she unlocked her phone. "He's good at hiding things," she whispered. "He deletes messages, records me when I'm upset. He makes it all look like I'm losing it." Julia nodded. "That's coercive control. It's abuse, just not the kind that always leaves visible scars. But we can prove it." I watched Julia scroll through photos and voice recordings, her jaw tightening. "This isn't just physical, Mrs. Carter," she said, glancing up at me. "This is psychological warfare." I swallowed hard. "So what can we do?" "We'll file for a restraining order," she said. "But it has to be airtight. We'll gather medical records, timestamps, message logs, witnesses, anything that makes his pattern clear." Emily rubbed her hands together, her knuckles pale. "He'll come for me, Julia. He always does." Julia leaned forward, her tone steady. "Not if we're prepared, not this time." The next few weeks blurred together, court filings, phone calls, police visits. Every day felt like walking a tightrope. Emily would flinch at sudden sounds. The ring of the phone, the creak of the porch steps, even a car door slamming outside, it all sent a jolt through her. At night, she'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat. I'd rush to her side, holding her until she could breathe again. Other nights, she'd just sit by the window, still as stone, watching the streetlights flicker across the wet pavement. "You ever just feel like he's still here?" she'd whisper. "Like he's watching?" And I'd tell her, "He's not, you're safe now." But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Then came the nights when fear turned into paranoia. Every text from an unknown number froze her. Every knock on the door made her jump. Once, the doorbell rang close to midnight. Emily gasped and grabbed my arm. "Don't answer it," she whispered. We sat there in silence until whoever it was left. That's what abuse does. It doesn't end when the bruises heal. It lingers. It teaches you to fear shadows. I kept telling myself we were doing everything right, building evidence, staying alert, keeping contact limited. But the truth, nothing prepares you for the moment the past shows up on your doorstep. It was late. The house was dim except for the glow from the kitchen. I was rinsing a cup when headlights flashed across the front window. For a second, I thought it was just a neighbor pulling into their driveway, but the light didn't move, it stayed. Emily's voice came from the living room, soft, terrified. "Mom," she whispered, "it's him." I turned slowly, my heart pounding. "What?" She pointed toward the window, her hands shaking. "It's him." I stepped closer, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see, and there he was, Daniel, leaning against his car, parked right across the street. His arms folded, that smug smile plastered across his face, the same one he wore at the station. Like this was all just a game, like he owned the ending. The porch light flickered over him, catching the faint smirk on his lips. He wasn't saying anything, just standing there, staring at the house like it was a trophy he'd lost and planned to reclaim. I felt cold all over, not scared, not anymore, just furious. Emily clung to me, whispering, "He's watching us, Mom, he's watching." I pulled her close and whispered back, "Let him watch. He doesn't know who he's dealing with anymore." Because something inside me had changed, something fierce, something unstoppable. I dialed Julia's number with shaking fingers. "He's here," I said. She didn't waste a second. "Call the cops," she replied. "Right now, do not go outside." The dispatcher kept me on the line until the patrol car arrived. 2 officers stepped out, their flashlights cutting across the dark. Daniel raised his hands like he was some innocent guy out for a walk. "Evening, officers," he said smoothly. "Just checking on my wife, she's been unstable lately. Her mother's influencing her." The nerve of him twisting it right there in front of me. One officer came to the porch and said quietly, "Ma'am, is this man known to you?" "Known to me," I said, my voice shaking. "That's the man who put my daughter in a hospital. That's the man you need to keep away from my home." They asked him to leave, but I could tell from his grin that this wasn't over. It was a message, a reminder that fear was his favorite weapon. After they drove him off, I shut every window, locked every door, checked them twice. Emily was curled up on the couch, crying quietly. "He'll come back," she said through tears. "He always comes back." I sat beside her, pulling her into my arms. "Then we'll be ready," I whispered, because I knew now this wasn't just about justice. This was about survival, and I wasn't just fighting for her anymore. I was fighting with her. Some wars are fought in silence, no medals, no flags, no victories you can see, just a mother and her daughter holding the line together while the enemy smiles from the dark. You can tell a storm is coming long before the thunder hits. Sometimes it's not the sky that darkens, it's the feeling in your gut that tells you peace won't last much longer. The rain started slow that night, just a quiet drizzle tapping against the windows, steady and cold. The kind of rain that makes the whole world seem to whisper. I remember sitting on the couch, the TV playing low in the background when I noticed him. Daniel, he was out there, standing by the mailbox like a shadow that refused to fade. The streetlight glowed against his wet jacket, the rain sliding down his face, but he didn't move. Not for a minute, not for an hour. He just stood there, watching. Emily noticed him next. Her hands began to shake, her breath catching. "Mom," she whispered, voice barely audible, "he's back." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Don't open the door," I said firmly. She nodded, gripping her phone like a lifeline. Then it came, that knock. Firm, measured, not the frantic kind that begs for forgiveness. No, this one demanded attention. It echoed through the house like a heartbeat you couldn't ignore. "Emily," his voice called from outside, soft and even. "We need to talk, just 5 minutes, that's all." Her body stiffened. "That's how it always starts," she whispered, tears welling up. "He sounds calm right before he snaps." The fear in her voice, I'll never forget it. That quiet, trembling kind of fear that comes from surviving something no one else fully understands. I went to the window, yanked the curtain aside, and shouted through the glass, "Leave us alone, Daniel. You're not welcome here." He looked up at me, rain dripping from his hair, and gave that same faint, chilling smile, the one that said he still thought he had control. "Mrs. Carter," he called back smoothly, "I just want to make things right." Make things right? How dare he say that standing there in the dark after everything he'd done? The rain kept falling harder, a cold, relentless rhythm on the roof. But he didn't leave. He just stood there, his hands in his pockets, staring at the house like it still belonged to him. I dialed 911 again, my fingers trembling as I spoke. "He's here, he's outside my home." The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. "Stay inside, ma'am. Officers are on their way." 15 minutes felt like an eternity. The sound of sirens was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. Blue lights flashed against the wet pavement, painting the street in shades of warning and salvation. Daniel didn't resist. Of course he didn't. He played innocent like it was second nature. "I wasn't trespassing," he said to the officers, hands raised casually. "I was just checking on my wife. She hasn't been answering her calls." I was worried. That word made me sick. The officer turned toward me, standing by the porch. "Ma'am, did he enter the property?" "No," I said, my voice trembling with fury. "But he's been standing there for hours, harassing my daughter." The officer nodded, then warned him firmly. "Sir, you need to leave the premises. Another incident like this and we'll be pressing charges." Daniel smiled faintly, like this was some kind of polite misunderstanding. "Of course, officer, I didn't mean to cause trouble." But before he turned to go, he looked at the house right at our window. His lips moved slowly, and even through the rain and glass I could read it clear as day. "You can't hide forever." My whole body went cold. When the squad car finally pulled away, Emily collapsed onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. "He's never going to stop, Mom," she cried. "He'll just keep finding ways to get close." "He always does." I wrapped my arms around her, my own tears finally falling. The rain outside became our background music, steady, endless, like it had no plans to stop. I stroked her hair, whispering, "We'll stop him, Emily. Even if it's the last thing I do." She shook her head weakly, whispering, "He knows everything, Mom, my workplace, my friends, where we shop. He'll find me." Her voice cracked, and I could feel her trembling against me. "Then we'll change everything," I said, fierce now. "New number, new locks, new routine, whatever it takes." But deep inside, I knew this wasn't about locks or numbers anymore. This was about power, the kind a man like him thought he still owned. That night, after Emily finally fell asleep, I stayed awake in the dark. The rain had turned from a drizzle into a storm, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. I sat by the living room window, staring out at the street. Every set of headlights that passed made my heart jolt. Every sound made me look twice. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled deep and heavy, like the sky itself was angry. And maybe it was, because somewhere out there a man like Daniel was sleeping comfortably, knowing he could still make us afraid. I whispered to myself, "Not anymore." Because that night something inside me shifted. The fear didn't disappear, it hardened into resolve. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a guard, a witness, a warrior who refused to lose her child to another man's control. The next morning the rain was gone, but puddles still reflected the pale gray sky. Emily was still asleep, her face softer for the first time in days. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat at the table, and stared out the window at the spot where he'd stood. There were still faint footprints in the mud, proof that he had been there. Proof that monsters don't live under beds. They live down the street, hiding behind smiles and good manners. I picked up my phone and sent Julia a message. "He came again. I want to file the restraining order immediately." She replied a few minutes later. "Good, we'll make it airtight this time. I'll handle the paperwork, you just keep her safe." I smiled bitterly at those last 3 words. Keep her safe, if only it were that simple. That evening, I found Emily sitting by the window again, watching the sunset paint the sky gold and red. "He used to love the rain," she said softly, said it made him feel calm. "I used to think that was beautiful." I sat beside her and took her hand. "Sometimes, honey, people hide their storms in poetry, doesn't mean they're not dangerous." She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. I just want to feel normal again. You will, I said quietly. But first we fight. Outside, the last drops of rain slid down the glass like fading tears. The storm had passed for now, but the air still felt charged, heavy with everything that hadn't been said yet. I took one last look at the street before pulling the curtains shut. He might have left, but I knew deep down he wasn't done. And neither was I. The rain stopped that night, but peace didn't follow. Because when the storm lives inside a man, it never really ends, it just waits for another night to knock. Sometimes the scariest silence is the one left on the table, a missing coat, a phone that won't ring. That quiet can mean danger or it can mean change. That morning, it meant both. I woke to an empty house the next morning, the kind of empty that feels like a held breath. Emily's mug sat where she'd left it, the steam long gone. Her jacket wasn't on the hook by the door. Her phone lay face up on the kitchen table, screen dark. At first I thought she'd stepped out for coffee. Then panic came in, cold and sudden, like a hand on the back of my neck. I called her name, then another time, faster, louder. No answer. I ran from room to room, checking closets, the backyard, the car. My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to get out. Then my phone buzzed. A text. My thumb trembled as I opened it. The message was from her. Mom, don't worry, I just needed to see him one last time to end it properly. Those words landed like an anchor. My hands went ice cold. My throat closed up. I called her nothing. I called Julia. She picked up right away and said she'd get the police on it immediately. Hours stretched long and thin. Every tick of the clock felt like a mile. I pictured a dozen nightmares, every one worse than the last. Where was she? Was he with her? Had she gone because she thought she could fix it alone? Just as the sky dimmed to a bruised evening, the front door crashed open. Emily stumbled in, drenched, hair plastered to her cheeks, mascara running in dark tracks. She looked like she'd been through a storm, and from the look of her, she had. He almost convinced me again, she whispered, collapsing into a chair. The tremor in her voice told the rest. He cried, he said he loved me, he begged. She stopped, hands clutched at the fabric of her shirt. I saw then the faint bruise blooming near her collarbone, the start of a new shame. My stomach dropped. For a second I couldn't breathe. I pushed him away and ran, she said, breathless. I'm done, Mom, I'm never going back. She was shaking, but there was steel under that tremble now, not the fragile sort. This was the kind of resolve that comes after you've been broken and decide not to lie down again. That night, Emily filed the final report. This time the statement was sharp, detailed, and clean, a surgeon's cut through the fog of his lies. Julia sat with us, holding our hands through the paperwork, guiding Emily every step of the way. She listened to the story and took notes, then double-checked the medical forms and the timestamps. We make it airtight, she said. No wiggle room, no, she said that favors him. We'll get the restraining order, Julia added. We'll document everything, we'll make sure no one can gaslight this away. Emily nodded, her jaw working. He'll try something, he always does. I watched her sign the forms, the ink dark and final on the pages. There was relief there, a small, aching relief, but also the knowledge that this wouldn't be an easy victory. Men like Daniel don't accept being shut down. They escalate. They lash out. They send warnings that pretend to be apologies. And Daniel had a signature move. The very next day, a letter arrived at our mailbox. No return address. Our names typed perfectly on the front of a plain white envelope. My hands shook as I slid it open. Inside, on one sheet, a single line, "You ruined my life. Now I'll ruin yours." Emily's fingers trembled as she read it aloud. The words sounded small and poisonous, a threat typed in cheap ink. I took the paper from her and said, flat and calm, he already ruined his own. But the truth was, threats like that land. They burrow into your sleep. They turn every noise into a possible danger. That night neither of us slept. We sat up, lights on low, a police log app open on my phone, emergency numbers bookmarked, Julia's number on speed dial. Every creak of the house made us jump. Every passing car felt like a potential menace. At one point, Emily reached for me and said, voice barely more than a whisper, "What if this never ends?" I looked at her, my daughter, the girl who once clung to my leg in thunderstorms, and something in me hardened like steel. Then we make it end, I told her. We don't wait for him to stop, we stop him. I didn't let her out of my sight for days, and that was fine. I cooked, I cleaned, I sat with her while she slept in the afternoon. I called her work and explained she needed time off. I called neighbors I trusted and told them to keep an eye out. I changed locks, updated security cameras, and had the phone company put a block on unknown numbers. We moved her things to a safe place. We set up backup plans for every scenario we could imagine. We made sure she had cash and documents in a secure bag because predators love to take away the things that make you leave. But more than logistics, we built narrative. We wrote down every detail: times, wounds, words, reactions. We backed it with receipts, texts, screenshots, things a judge can't look at and decide are just he said, she said. We turned chaos into a paper trail, and paper is proof. We also planned for his impulsive moves. Julia said, if he tries to harass or intimidate publicly, we document it. If he tries to get violent, you call 911 immediately. Don't engage. Keep safe. I promised, then I promised again. Mothers are stupidly determined when their kids are on the line. Neighbors began to notice him. A man who'd once waved politely now paced the curb and stared. One neighbor even offered to let Emily stay with them on nights she felt unsafe. Small shields that together become armor. On a cold, sleepless morning, I sat on the back steps and watched dawn color the sky. The letter lay on the table beside me like a challenge. I thought of all the mothers before me who'd stood mute and lost their daughters to men like Daniel. I thought of Emily's small, stubborn hands and the way she'd gripped mine that night at the station. That day I decided something else. We wouldn't just survive, we would push back so hard no one else would have to pick up the pieces of his cruelty. We'd tell the truth so loudly the world would have to listen. He could send letters. He could threaten. He could try to ruin us. But he had underestimated two things: the force of a mother's fury turned to purpose, and the stubborn will of a woman who finally chose herself. We were done running. Threats are cheap. Courage is not. And when a mother puts her courage on the line, the world better learn to take notice. There's a kind of fear that doesn't scream, it just hums quietly under your skin. You carry it into courtrooms, into coffee shops, into your dreams. But there's also a kind of courage that shows up in the same silence: shaking hands, steady heart, still standing. That's the kind of courage my daughter walked in with that Monday morning. The courthouse smelled like rain and old paper, like justice that had waited too long to be served. Emily walked beside me, pale but upright, her steps measured, her chin just barely lifted. She looked fragile, but I knew better. That wasn't weakness, that was worn-out strength refusing to give up. Daniel was already there when we arrived. Clean-shaven, hair slicked back, wearing a tailored gray suit that screamed, "See, I'm the victim here." He stood by his lawyer, chatting politely, smiling that fake church boy smile. When his eyes met mine, he gave a little nod, like this was all some friendly misunderstanding we'd sort out over tea. I swear the nerve of that man still makes my skin crawl. The bailiff called the case. We took our seats. The judge, a tall, stone-faced man with the kind of gaze that could slice through lies, entered, and the room stood quiet. Daniel's lawyer started first, voice dripping with charm. "Your Honor," he said, "my client is a devoted husband. He's simply been struggling with a highly emotional spouse. Things were said in anger, but this," he gestured toward us, "this is not abuse. It's a misunderstanding between two people who have lost their way." A few folks in the back shook their heads. Me, I gripped my purse so tight my knuckles turned white. I wanted to shout, "You don't get to rewrite the story just because you dress it in a suit." Then it was Emily's turn. She stood slowly. For a second her hands shook, but when she started speaking, her voice carried something raw and steady. "Your Honor," she began, "for years I was told I was crazy, overly dramatic, unstable. I started believing it. But bruises don't lie, the fear doesn't lie. The nights I hid in my car, those don't lie." The courtroom went still. Even Daniel stopped smirking. Julia stood beside her, sliding a folder onto the bench, neatly organized evidence. Photos, voice messages, medical reports, texts that turned sweet words into threats. Emily went on. "He said I was making it all up. But every time I tried to leave, there was a price. Every time I spoke, I paid in pain. I'm not here to ruin anyone's life. I'm here because I want mine back." Her voice cracked, but she didn't back down. I wanted to stand and cheer, to tell the judge that's my girl. When she sat down, I slipped my hand over hers. Her fingers were cold but firm. Daniel's lawyer tried to object, mumbling something about emotional testimony. But the judge held up a hand, eyes fixed on Daniel. "I've heard enough," he said. He took a moment, flipping through the stack of evidence. Each photograph, each timestamp, each bruise that told its own story. The silence in that room felt like judgment itself. Finally, the judge spoke, calm, deliberate, final. "This is not a matter of emotion," he said. "It's a matter of safety." The court grants a full restraining order against Mr. Daniel Reed, effective immediately. You could have heard a pin drop. Emily gasped, covering her mouth. I felt something lift inside me, not joy, not even relief, but something deeper, something like release. Daniel stood abruptly, the mask cracking right there in front of everyone. His voice dropped to a hiss. "This isn't over." Before he could say another word, the bailiff stepped forward. "Sir, you need to sit down," he warned. Daniel glared, but for once he obeyed. As we left the courtroom, I placed a hand on Emily's back. "It's over, honey," I whispered. "You're free now." Outside, the sky looked brand new. The storm clouds that had been hanging over us for weeks were gone, replaced by sunlight so warm it felt like forgiveness. Emily tilted her face toward it and closed her eyes. For the first time in months, I saw her smile, a small one but real. We didn't say much on the ride home. The radio played quietly, some old Motown tune about letting go, and I caught her humming along. Just a few months ago, she couldn't even listen to music without flinching. That sound, her humming, felt like victory. Back home, I brewed tea the way I always did when words ran out. We sat in the kitchen, steam rising between us. It was quiet, not the tense kind of quiet, but peaceful. For the first time, the house didn't feel haunted. "Mom," she said softly, tracing the rim of her mug, "I don't even know who I am without fear." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You're the woman who survived it," I said. "You're the woman who fought back, that's who you are. And baby, that's more than enough." She smiled again, tired but stronger. "Do you really think it's over?" I looked out the window, the sunlight hitting the raindrops on the glass like tiny diamonds. "I think it's the start of something new," I said. "Freedom doesn't show up all at once. It's slow, like morning light. You don't notice it until it fills the whole room." We sat there, mother and daughter, just breathing. The kind of breathing that doesn't have to be careful anymore. That night, as she slept upstairs, I went through the house and locked every door, out of habit more than fear. I passed by the mirror in the hallway and caught a glimpse of myself, older, worn, but steadier than I'd been in years. I whispered to that reflection, "You did it. You got her out." Because that's what mothers do. We fight wars nobody sees. We hold the line even when our hands are shaking. And for the first time in forever, I slept without dreaming of his face. Freedom doesn't come wrapped in fireworks. Sometimes it comes in the quiet, in a deep breath, in sunlight on your skin after years of storm. And that's when you realize surviving was never the end of the story. It was just the start of living again. You never realize how loud peace can be until you've lived through chaos. For months, I'd forgotten what quiet sounded like, not the kind of quiet that scares you, but the kind that heals you. And when it finally came, it was like breathing for the first time after being underwater too long. It had been months since the court hearing. The house finally felt alive again, not just lived in, but alive. Sunlight came through the curtains differently now, warmer somehow. The air didn't carry tension anymore. Even the silence sounded softer, like it was humming something gentle just for us. Emily was changing piece by piece, day by day. She wasn't the same woman who used to jump at every sound, who double-checked locks and stared out windows in fear. She was rebuilding, not fast, not perfect, but real. She started volunteering at a local women's shelter downtown. At first, she just wanted something to keep her busy, sorting through donation boxes, organizing files, passing out supplies. Simple things. But I knew it wasn't just about staying busy. She was trying to find herself again, to see who she was outside the shadow of what he'd done to her. Some days, she came home quiet. Other days, she came home fired up, angry at the stories she'd heard, determined to do more. And one night, she came home glowing. "Mom," she said, dropping her bag on the table, "they asked me to help lead a new program at the shelter." I looked up from my cup of tea. "Lead it? What kind of program?" "For women who are rebuilding their lives after abuse," she said, her voice small but proud. "They said my story could help others find courage." For a second, I couldn't even speak. My throat tightened. "You," I whispered finally. "Emily, that's incredible." She smiled, a soft, genuine smile that lit up her whole face. "I think I finally understand something, Mom. You once told me the truth doesn't save you instantly. It just shows up when you're brave enough to face it." I used to think you meant courage in court, but now I think you meant the courage to start over." I reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, the way I did when she was little. "You're braver than I ever was," I said, and I meant it, because she wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. That night after she went to bed, I sat by the window like I always do, a cup of tea warming my hands. The street outside was quiet, washed clean by an early spring rain. The streetlights glowed gold against the wet pavement, and for once I didn't see shadows as threats, just reminders that darkness doesn't last forever. I thought about everything we'd been through, the nights I held her while she cried so hard her body shook, the mornings when she stared at her reflection, wondering who she'd become, the endless days filled with police reports, fear, and whispers from people who didn't understand. And then I thought about this moment, about her laughter echoing down the hallway earlier, light and unafraid. That's when it hit me. Justice doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's not a gavel banging in a courtroom, it's a woman finally saying, "I'm free." A few weeks later, Emily's new program began. The shelter was small but bright, full of handmade posters, coffee cups, and brave women with tired eyes. I stopped by one afternoon to bring her lunch, and I stood quietly in the back while she spoke to a group of women gathered in a circle. Her voice carried calm and strength. "When I was in it," she said, "I thought leaving would destroy me, but staying was destroying me faster. Healing isn't pretty, it's messy. It's crying on your kitchen floor at 3 a.m. and still waking up the next morning to try again. It's forgiving yourself for not seeing the red flags sooner. And it's believing one day at a time that you deserve peace." One woman reached for her hand, another wiped tears from her cheeks. I watched them, my own eyes wet, realizing that my daughter, the same girl who once begged me for help from a police station, was now helping others find their own way out of the dark. When she caught sight of me afterward, she smiled that shy smile she always had as a child. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "Just watching you shine," I said softly. She laughed, embarrassed. "You always say that? Because it's always true." The next morning, she left early for work. Her steps were light, confident, like each one belonged to her now. I stood at the doorway, watching her walk down the path, sunlight spilling over her hair. There was something sacred in that moment, something I can't quite explain. It was like watching the universe give her back everything it had once taken away. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the old ache of worry tugging at my chest. There was only pride, pure, unshakable pride. I looked up at the sky, clear and gold with the morning light, and whispered, "The storm has passed, baby, and you're still standing." That night, as I turned off the lights and got ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror, older, sure, but softer somehow. My heart didn't feel heavy anymore. I realized that survival isn't just about getting through the worst, it's about letting the best come back in. Emily called out from her room before I fell asleep. "Good night, Mom." "I love you," I smiled into the dark. "I love you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know." And that's when it hit me, maybe healing doesn't mean going back to who we were before. Maybe it means becoming someone new, someone who knows the taste of pain and still chooses love anyway. They say storms break things, but sometimes they break you open. And when the sun finally rises again, you realize you weren't just surviving the storm, you were becoming the light that came after it.